Hello, everyone. I'm Sue Taylor, and you're listening to a Sitting with Sue podcast. Today, I'm delighted to have sitting with me Steven Helman, who is a loss adjusting and claims consultant from Exchange Street, who are recruitment and specialists in the insurance sector. Firstly, Steven, a little bit of background information about your career and your current role, and then we're going to go straight into our first question.
Excellent. Well, thanks for having me, Sue. So I started off my journey in insurance with the CIS on motor claims before moving to GAB Robins, and I was in the liability team dealing with ELPL disease, PLPD, and I sat in between the construction and engineering team, the commercial property team, and the major loss team, and it was a really great environment to kind of be part of that. And from there, I got into recruiting for claims and loss adjusting, and I've been with Exchange Street for about 15 years now, and maybe a little bit more. We recruit into adjusters internationally, although our core work is in the UK, but we cover all over. We've assisted with numerous CAT situations, from the Christchurch earthquakes in New Zealand to floods in Bangkok and hurricanes in the Caribbean. And I've been lucky to work with great adjusters and be adjacent to the profession and see how it's changed over the last few years.
Wow, well, that is certainly an interesting career. So I've got one quick question just before we start on the proper questions. What important industry lesson, therefore, have you learned in such a varied career?
Well, I would say a few things. One, the main thing is probably companies always want to have the ideal candidate and someone who's done exactly the same thing for a competitor. And sometimes a little bit too quick to write off somebody who doesn't quite hit the exact criteria that they're looking for. But I've seen many times that with those, if those people are given a chance, and I sometimes have to advocate quite strongly for them, but if they're given a chance, that they're really dedicated to proving themselves and not letting their manager down, and they really do have a desire to progress and do well. And like with anything, it has its limits. Wouldn't want to have a bus driver being a brain surgeon without some training. But I think just be a bit more open-minded, and you can be pleasantly surprised that people really dedicate themselves to working hard and doing well.
Right, well, everybody should be fortunate to know that I have no intention of actually applying for any jobs for brain surgery. But talking about the brain surgeons, most of them have lots of professional qualifications.
Yes.
And I mean, what benefits do you see for those that have professional qualifications in the loss adjusting fraternity?
Well, I think it's a stamp of quality, really, and it helps with the technical knowledge, it helps with your career, can help you get hired. It can be a passport to better quality claims and to climb the adjusting ladder. And I think it helps other people involved in the claim as well have confidence in you, because they can see that you've got that qualification.
So does it actually make the placement process easier from a recruitment perspective?
Yeah, it does, I think. If you're chartered or advanced dipsilla, definitely. I would say dipsilla most likely, and even certisilla, it has an advantage over people who don't have that qualification. It doesn't tell the full story, of course. Further investigation requires your cultural fit, other things like that. But yeah, it's a useful shorthand for, I think, employers to say, yeah, this person has a decent technical foundation and is willing to work on themselves and to progress.
So it's almost like the qualifications make you sort of stand out as being a professional, and having that professional mindset. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are lots of, or have been lots of, unqualified adjusters who've had, have got great experience and technical knowledge and empathy. So it's not the full picture, but I do think that it does make you stand out. As I said, it's a hallmark of quality, and it shows others who are dealing with a claim or involved in the claim, and to your employers and to insurers, that you're serious about the profession and you know what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, when I took my exams, it was a matter of trying to qualify, study, fit with a job, juggling a family as well. I mean, do you have any comments on sort of, is it worth doing all that juggling?
Yeah, I think it's worth it, and it does it does take quite a long time to qualify, and it's not easy to juggle when you've got a full-on job and a family as well. But I think since Scylla broke the qualification down into its kind of constituent parts, and you've got these milestones that you can work towards, and maybe have a little breather after each section, that can make it a little bit easier. But yeah, it is a balancing act, but I definitely think it's worth it for the reasons that I said before. And I think companies are more sympathetic these days to trying to get people through the qualifications, and they're putting more resources into it to helping people and giving people a bit more time and space to help them do that. So it is difficult, but I definitely think it's worth it.
And it's very much looking at it from a step process. So if you've taken your Cert Scylla, it's saying, I've got my Cert Scylla, and I'm looking to do my dip in the next year, 2 years, etc. So that you have like a path that is achievable.
Yeah.
But also it's being able to make the point to yourself that they're on that path.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not so overwhelming to say, like, I've got 12 exams to do, I've done 2, I've got nothing particularly to show for it until I get right to the end. That's a lot more overfacing probably than being able to say, right, I've done my Cert Scylla, I'm gonna, move on to my dip. I've got that under my belt, and I can move on to the dip and onwards and upwards.
I mean, you mentioned that you think there's now greater flexibility in the workplace, and I think that's very much the case. I think post-COVID, we've seen quite a big mind shift. But is maternity and paternity leave also a potential learning opportunity as well?
Yeah, I think it is a potential opportunity. I think probably for the first 3 months, where maybe not the best time. You're probably
Sleep
hallucinating from
deprivation.
sleep deprivation, exactly. But depending on how soon after you take your leave the baby comes, I think there's a chunk of time you can use there. And then once the first 3 months of having the baby are over, and you've got things have settled down a bit more, then I definitely think there's some time there to be utilized to study away from sort of the hustle and bustle of a full-time adjusting job, nap times, to use that to study.
And part of it is also sort of getting the brain keep on working as well in a sort of a professional manner. Mind you, as somebody who took 3 months maternity leave with my first and 3 weeks with my second, I never actually managed to do any studying. But I mean, you obviously think that loss adjusting is a great career.
Yeah.
And what particularly makes you draw that as a conclusion?
Well, I think when people, if they do think about loss adjusters, they often assume that they're just there to try and make sure that the insurer pays as little as possible on the claim. But that's not the case. I think the reason I think it's a great career is because it combines so many things, from investigation, technical knowledge, supporting people and businesses at really difficult times. There's constant learning and development, new innovations, a real career ladder, and there's so many different classes of business and niches. There's elements of law, accountancy, engineering, surveying, and there's always going to be claims. And so, while nothing you can say is future proof, and AI and tech will have an impact on the future of the profession, I think there'll always need to be human touch and empathy when dealing with claims, particularly the complex and high value ones. So I think it's a great career for the future.
Very future proofed. Yes, as you say, I mean, people only buy insurance because they think they might have a claim.
Exactly.
I mean, one of the, if you like, again, another growing trend is apprenticeships. They're now becoming more common, either in place of or aligning with the graduate program. And how do you see the sort of the apprenticeships sort of filling in on the career path and melding with the examinations as well?
Well, I think any route that brings talented people into the profession is a good thing, and to have people from various different backgrounds and experiences is always a good thing. And I know some people in the past would probably have said, being thrown in the deep end is a valuable way of getting some experience, and that may be true for some people, but I think these structured programs where you have sessions with disaster restoration companies, building contractors, forensic accountants, investigators, to get really good understanding and grounding of what's involved in a loss, formal training and doing the qualifications as well as that, it dovetails nicely and will produce some great adjusters.
So when you're looking at it from a recruitment perspective, you're very open-minded to both apprenticeships and graduate schemes. You're looking at, if you like, a rounded person from all perspectives.
Yeah, I think whatever way that the main thing is getting the right person with the right mindset, and whatever background they come from doesn't necessarily matter, as long as there's a place in the profession for lots of different people, and I think it doesn't matter. And the wider the talent pool, the better, because I think in the past it was probably too narrow, and now it's really opened up, particularly over the last few years. Not over the last few years, but particularly over quite 10, 20 years, loads more women have come into adjusting, and I think people from different backgrounds. So yeah, it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's a very good career, obviously. But just before we finish, I've got one last question, because I realise I've been giving you a bit of a grilling. What is the number one point that you hope that the listeners have learned from the conversation today?
Number one point I would say is that although juggling study for the exams can be tricky, that it is really worth it for your career, and it can really open up doors for you in the profession, and that loss adjusting is a great career.
Brilliant. I completely agree with you anyway, obviously. So that draws today's podcast to a close, and a huge thank you to Steven for joining me. And you've been absolutely brilliant and really interesting. So for further information about Steven or other podcasts, please go to www.suetaylor.co.uk. Thank you and goodbye from both of us.